dirt road off a 2-lane past a shot up county sign. Squeaking of a backyard screen door letting you know that it's
The Putnam Personalities podcast exists to highlight the good, the positive, and the inspirational in our community. This episode is not an endorsement of any political or religious ideology. This podcast is a simple interview to get to know our friends, neighbors, leaders, and colleagues on a more personal level. Sit back, grab some sweet tea, and enjoy today's interview.
like home to me.
So,
welcome.
Thank you. And you built this cabin, didn't you?
Yes, I built it with the help of 2 people.
Yeah, I know we've brought people here before and showed it off, and it's a beautiful little place, and it's nice and quiet.
It is. Reminds me of home.
Reminds you of home. Well, here's the thing. So this is a little different because when I normally record, we have a little table, and I just tell people it's like we're sitting here having coffee, and people are just eavesdropping on our conversation. I always tell them, don't even worry about the camera. Like, the camera doesn't exist because we're just having a conversation. And so it's a little different because the setup's different. But I really enjoy coming to your house. I know that you have... Well, I'm going to let you do the most of the talking, but how much property you have here? Tell us about what you do here. We'll get into your childhood and teaching and all that later, but just real quick, like, I know you like to talk about your gardening. You like to can. You have a lot of trees and plants, so tell us a little bit about that.
Yeah, I moved here 4 years ago, and it's a little less than 3/4 of an acre. And the first thing I wanted to do was build a food forest. And a food forest has your canopy trees, and then it has your understory trees, and then it has your ground cover. And I wanted to plant things that were useful and edible. So on this less than 3/4 of an acre, I have 93 fruit trees and producing bushes. And then in my backyard, I have a vegetable garden that's been very productive. I'm able to can a lot from there. And I have 13 hens that provide me in plenty of eggs. So I rarely go to a big box grocery store, maybe once every 6 months, just to buy flour and sugar. And if I could mill my own flour here, I would. I do mill my own cornmeal. I've got a grinder, and I do dent corn that someone sends down to me. But I really enjoy gardening, and it's in my blood. I grew up that way. We'll get into more of that when we talk about my childhood and where I grew up. But I really don't want to go anywhere, or there's many days that my car never goes out of the driveway. I'll go to the post office maybe once a week, but I'm happy here. This is really my happy place.
What's interesting about this interview is, as well as you're my first church member to get the interview.
Wow.
And I guess years ago, driving certain people back and forth to church, some of the elderly, they don't have rides. And so that was a while ago where I thought, I wish I could tell more of their story. And of course, some of the people that want to tell their story, they either passed on or mentally aren't able to really share that anymore. And that kind of discourages me because I know there was a lot to learn, and I got what I could at the time. But I really value people and who they are and the things they do. So when people tell me stuff that they have done or neat things in their life, I'm like, oh, that's really cool. And I feel like I want to tell everybody about it. And I know it almost sounds like gossiping in a way, but I want to share the good things. And a lot of times in our community, I know you lived here as a young person, you moved away, you never thought you'd move back, but we do hear a lot of negative in our community, and I know there's a lot of positive. And so my goal with this podcast has been from day one is try to draw out some of that positive and the uniqueness and our neighbors, our teachers, like, who are they? What have they done? And, I think if people start to realize that someone's not just a teacher, someone's not just a church member, but they actually have, their life has value and matters, and they've been to places that we've never ever been, and maybe even can share those experiences, it kind of adds value to our lives as well. And I think you've done that since you've been at our church the last, I guess it's been 3 or 4 years you've been coming. And you've actually been asked to teach our elementary kids class. And I know our kids love when you're there. Every week you have something special that you do to catch their attention, a little project or something. And sometimes it's out of the ordinary, it's unique, it's different, it's creative, and I appreciate that. And I know my kids have benefited from you, and I've even brought friends here that have visited us from out of state just so their kids could see your house. And I know the inside of your house, we've talked about that being a Cracker Barrel and steroids.
Yeah.
And so you do a lot of decorating. You kind of make things you can make anything out of anything. So it's pretty cool. But so I appreciate you as a person, as a friend, and I appreciate you, being a part of our church here in Hollister. But let's talk about that. Let's talk about where you grew up, where you came from, all that good stuff. Let's start there.
I was born in Baltimore, Maryland. My mother was born and raised in Baltimore, and my dad came into port in Baltimore, and my mother fell madly in love with him, but he was a poor dirt farmer from the rural area of West Virginia, and they married, and he took my mother to West Virginia. It was a total culture shock as she grew up in town and belonged to sororities and everything. And so he took her to my grandmother's house with no electricity and no running water. And so she learned a lot. And it was all part of God's plan, though, for her to go there, because she was Catholic and she gave her heart to the Lord through all of that. But I was raised up in rural West Virginia, and I loved it. We were poor. We had some issues. I had a sick father, and we had a lot of issues, but we were poor, but everybody was poor. And we lived in a little 4-room house, and we had no running water, but we had a neighbor that had a well, and she allowed us to go down and draw water out of the well. And I was thinking this morning as I took the hose and was watering my sweet potato plants, I was thinking how when we were little, we had to go all the way down to that well, and you always wanted to carry 2 buckets of water so it would balance you, and carry that across the field and down to the bottomland so you could put a dipper of water on each sweet potato plant. And how blessed I am to be able to go to the house and turn my water on. And we don't really think about that. I think about that when we talk about our missionaries at church, how many of them do not have a place to just go turn on the water and to take a shower.
Right.
I mean, you've heard funny stories, but they're not really funny about catching rainwater off of the house and taking your Saturday night bath in a number 2 wash tub. We did that, and that's how we got clean so we could go to church. But Mother's philosophy was use it up, wear it out, make it do, or you'll do without. And we didn't throw anything away. I know if we got, and people call it, and I don't call it this, but people call it aluminum foil. Well, it's tin foil to me, and that's how I grew up. And we have somebody in our church from West Virginia, and he also says tin foil. So anyway, if you happen to get a roll of tin foil, you didn't use that up. If Mama wrapped us a biscuit up to take, I went to a 2-room school, and we'd have a leftover biscuit maybe for our lunch. You wiped that tin foil off, and you folded it nice, and you brought it home. You might use that one little square for a month.
Right.
In your dinner bucket. We carried a lard bucket. We had an old pump on our school campus, 2 rooms, 8 grades. I went to school with boys that had beards in the 8th grade. But I was the marble champion there, so I had everybody's marbles, and I haven't lost all my marbles yet, so I still have 3 or 4 of them.
I was asked if you still have them or if you lost your marbles.
I have lost all my marbles.
So growing up there as a kid, you did you? Well, I was going to ask you this: did you finish high school?
I did not finish high school.
And that kind of leads in a lot of your story too, doesn't it?
It does. I did not finish high school. I became very disillusioned with school. My mother oftentimes had to be at the hospital with my father, and I would stay home. And I have one sister that's 16 months older. I'm now 75 years old, and thanking God for the strength that he gives me every day to be able to do the things that I do. But I had a brother that's 3 years younger and a sister that's almost 7 years younger. So oftentimes I would miss school. Probably didn't have any shoes to wear to school. And this was we had left West Virginia and had come to Florida and was living in St. Augustine. And I had been out. I had missed several days. And I remember going to school one day, and it was the beginning of algebra. It was in the 8th grade. And back then, teachers were right along with doctors and lawyers. That no longer, teachers are peons anymore. They're not respected. And we'll get into more of that when we talk about my teaching career. But I didn't understand what was on the board. And there was a cheerleader that was sitting on the edge of the teacher's desk. And this teacher had been to a party. Her dad was an attorney, had been to a party. And I stood there, was very polite, like I had been raised to be. And finally he turned around and said, "What do you want?" And I said, "I don't understand what's on the board." And he said, "No wonder you don't come to school half the time. I don't know why you don't quit." And I walked back to my desk and got my little book bag, and I walked out the door. Nobody ever checked on me. And I said, "Today I will get me a job and I'll help my mom." And so I went to the Fountain of Youth because it was close to our house.
How old were you now?
I was 14 years old. And I said, I would like to get a job. And the man that was running the Fountain of Youth, he said, "How old are you, young lady?" And I said, "I'm 18. I weighed about 60 pounds and not even 5 feet tall." He said, "You're 18? I said, "Yes, sir." He said, "Well, I'll tell you what." And he handed me a stack of papers. He said, "If you can take this and learn all of this and come back this afternoon and take me on a guided tour, I'll hire you." I said, "Okay." So I walked down to the bayfront. I know people thought I was crazy, and I'd read a little bit and I'd walk a little bit. And I would say, "This is the land of the flowers, La Florida." People were looking at me like I was crazy. And I walked all the way back to the Fountain of Youth, got there right before he closed. His eyes were big as saucers, like, "I don't believe this." And I said, "I'm ready, Mr. Franklin, to take you on a guided tour." And he said, "Okay, give me your papers." I handed him the papers. I took him on a guided tour. I told him about the Indian burial grounds. I became one of his head guides and ran the planetarium there. At 14 years old, he hired me. And I worked for him quite a while.
Good.
And then we left St. Augustine and came to Palatka.
So I guess in that transition, I didn't get, so you moved from West Virginia, then you moved to St. Augustine. I don't think we talked about that, but yeah. So we moved from West Virginia. What age were you when you moved from West Virginia to St. Augustine?
Well, we moved several times. The first time we came to Florida, we wound up in New Smyrna Beach. And I was 9 years old. I hated it. I hated school. I hated everything about it. I hated our life. I hated what was going on. But the biggest thing, we moved into the city, and I got very sick, and nobody could figure out what was wrong with me. And Mother finally took me to a doctor, and he said, "She's homesick." And that's exactly what was wrong with me. And the same thing happened in West Virginia when we moved out of the country. And my dad was a great electrician, and he got a job in the city of Huntington, a big city. My sister was so happy because we had a bathroom with a bathtub. I could have cared less about that. Where's the garden? Where's the tomatoes? Where's the cucumbers? And I didn't want to go to school. I was sick. I threw up. And finally, my grandfather started bringing produce and eggs from his farm, and he would bring them down. And I had a little wagon, and I had me a little produce business. And I pulled that wagon up and down the streets and sold produce. But just to pick up those tomatoes and smell them was the best medicine that I could get. But we went from there. We came to New Smyrna Beach. We went back to West Virginia. It was a nightmare living in South Carolina. We were homeless there. Lived in a mission for a while. That mission is still there. It was called Jesus Saves, and that was one of the songs that we had to sing. And it was years before I could sing that song. And I know we sing it now at church, and those memories just flood back. You know, I can sing it because truly He does save. But just the memories from that and the rough childhood. But I had a mother that was the glue that really, really held us together.
So now you're in Palatka. How old are you now in Palatka?
In Palatka, I was 15 when I moved to Palatka.
Now I told yesterday I did an interview with a man whose dad used to be the sheriff, and I had you talk to him afterwards and tell that story. So I guess we're at that part of your life now, right? So go ahead and continue on.
I had gotten a job in Palatka. I worked for Alderman's Dress Shop, and that's no longer there, across from the courthouse. And I was 15 years old, and we were renting in a not such a good place in town in Palatka, and the rent came due, so we didn't have money to pay the rent, so we were put out and had really nowhere to go. But Walt Pellissier Sr. knew that there was a little house out here in Hollister that could be bought pretty cheap. It was in disrepair, holes in the walls. It had people, squatters in it, but he made a down payment on that house for my mother. And it was a day before Thanksgiving. And he went grocery shopping. He brought us a full meal. He brought us mattresses. We took what we had in the little rental, mother, sheets and towels and things, and brought them and just started scrubbing and cleaning it up. But I will never forget, and that was in 1967, my mother stood in the doorway of that little Jim Walter house, and she said, "This is my final move." And it was her final move. She never had to move to another house other than the fact when she developed Alzheimer's, she stayed with all of us and passed at my sister's house in Palatka. She would be 100 this year.
Wow.
Yeah.
It's really neat. So that's a pretty neat story. So it's funny, you actually grew up right behind our church, right there on
Right
Tire
behind
Road.
the church.
Yeah, right there. All
And
those years.
her house, after we moved her out, we sold that house, and that house caught fire in her bedroom.
Mm.
So there again, God was really, watching over her. But they put a double wide over there, and the property came up for sale, and I wanted to buy it. And I started looking. My husband passed, and I had a big house in Lake Helen, and I sold that, and I rented for a little while there, and then took a little short move to Georgia and to live next to my son. And they moved to Alabama, and I didn't want to go to Alabama, so I started looking for a place that was kind of between my two sisters, one outside of Middleburg, one in Palatka. And I looked everywhere and never once thought I will go back to Hollister. And then I found out that Mother's property had come up for sale, but it had a pending on it, and the pending went through, and I was unable to get it. And I even talked to the people that bought it and said, "Would you be willing to sell that? I'm not much for wanting to live in a double wide." And they said, "No, we like it here and we don't want to sell it." So my sister called one day and went home all discouraged back to Georgia. And she called and she said, "Janet, there's a house in Hollister that I think will be a good house for you." And I came and looked at it, made 3 trips here because it had several pendings on it. And finally, I was on my way back to Georgia, and the realtor called and said, "Are you in a place where you can pull over?" And I said, "I am." And they said, "The last pending we had fell through. Are you still willing to buy this house?" I said, "Only if I sit in this parking lot and e-sign the papers and make an earnest payment out of my bank account to you will I do it." And I sat there for over an hour and a half in Blackshear, Georgia, and signed everything, and came back in 2 weeks and closed on the house. And here I am back in Hollister. If anybody had said, "You want to move to Hollister?" the answer would have been no. But I love it.
Yep.
Got a
I can tell you
corner
love
lot.
it. Yeah. I can tell you love it. You've made good friends with the neighbors. You found a church that you call home. And I know
Which
that
was home a long time ago. I went there with my mother. I was 17 years old when I went there. And whenever I would come up to visit her, I would visit the church. And one of my prized possessions in my house is one of the pews where my mother used to sit. And during COVID, when you took the pews out and got chairs, you were selling the pews, and you offered me one, and I took it. And it's so funny, when you pulled up with the trailer, I thought, that didn't look that long. And so when you put it out here, so I said, "What am I going to do?" And I said, "Well, the first cut's the deepest." And I took a Sawzall and cut it 3 feet long. And my nephew helped me, and I got it all together and got it all refinished. And it's cute. It's got carving in it that actually someone that is going to our church now, that is older than I am, somebody she was dating carved her name and his name in the back of the pew, and I have left it. I won't mention the name.
Yeah, that's funny. That's really cool.
Somebody said, "Well, we can sand that out." I said, "I wouldn't sand that out for anything." I love nostalgic, as you can see, with the porch and everything.
Well, tell me about your cabin. Where did all this happen, or how did this happen?
Well, when I bought the house, one of the things that sold this house to me were these huge, big live oaks. And this was a blank canvas. There was nothing here. There were no trees other than 2 holly trees in the front yard. I drove all around in this yard. I had to get rid of my riding lawnmower because I couldn't drive around in this yard. I had to do a little push mower. But I had some old windows that came out of an old hotel in Crescent City, and I had moved them 3 times. And so I said, I want to build a cabin. I want it to be cabin/greenhouse, but I really want it to look like an old log house, and I want to use all of my old materials. So behind the post office, there's a little guy that has a portable sawmill. And I ran into him, and he said, well, you can have all the rough cut lumber that you want. So this is all rough cut lumber on the front, if you can see it through the video there. And so I hauled this lumber. I mean, some of them were 20 feet long. They were cut off of a tree. So I put them in that little orange car up there and strapped them down, came across 20 and made so many loads of things. And then I built this door out of some old lumber. And there's a sign at the top. I'm not sure if it shows up in the video, but that piece of wood came off of my 4th great-grandfather's house in Lebanon, Virginia. He built a log cabin, and it's still standing. And I was able to go there. I cried when I got out of my brother's truck and waded across the creek. I felt like maybe Moses did when he had to take his shoes off on holy ground. But I thought, my 4th great-grandfather lived here and fought Indians here, and it's 400 acres. And I was so overwhelmed that I actually got to see something like that and be a part of that. But I have a few things from there. This latch was on the door. They asked us not to take anything off, if it was something loose, and I made sure this was loose. So I brought this back. That's the latch that he carved out and put on the door. And then the Campbells, and he built that house in 1830. So those are prize things for me. Then I needed a tin roof, and I thought, well, I've just put a tin roof on my house. I really can't afford to go buy tin to go on this. So you, as my pastor, said, well, we've got a stack of tin in the back.
Yeah, we were actually someone had given us our little roof over our shed that holds our lawnmower. It was leaking, and somebody gave us some new roofing, I guess tin. And so we took the old one off and we just piled it in the back. And then next thing I know, it's down here and covering your cabin.
Yeah, so. But I didn't have quite enough. So an elderly guy up the road who's actually in our family, he said, well, I've got some tin off of 100-year-old barn. If you want to come and drive your vehicle back through those weeds, he said, just watch out for rattlesnakes because we got them. So I put on my wading boots and I went out there and I drug tin. It was like 12 feet long off of a barn. And I put it in the back of that little car and I bungee corded it up. And I prayed all the way here and said, Lord, don't let it throw a spark and blow this car up. But I got it here and I piled it up. And I said, well, I can use that up on the roof. Well, when we got to that side and I got ready to use that on the roof, I picked it up and it looked like Swiss cheese. I said, oh, this is not going to work. But I really love this old rusty tin. So someone said, well, I know somebody that tore a trailer apart and there's some flat tin. I said, can we put it on and then put this on top and make a double roof? They said, no problem. But the funny thing, I had several guys that were carpenters that came and they said, now tell us what you want to do. And I told them, oh, you can't do that. You can't use this old wood and you can't use those old windows. It's just not going to work. I said, well, thank you for stopping by. And after going through about 5, this young man came by in his 30s. And I thought, now what is he going to know? And the first thing he said was, wow, where did you get all that old stuff? And I said, this is going to be my guy. And I said, do you think that we can build a cabin? And so I needed a floor. Well, my nephew had just torn off the deck of his house and it was 16 by 8. And I went, wow, we can put that down. I'm going to need some. I wanted it up on rocks because cabins are up on rocks in the mountains. And I didn't have any rocks really to put it up on. But when I moved here, there's a little pond out front and it had all kind of pavers and they were all weathered and mossy. Mm-hmm. So I drug those over here and had enough to go underneath of it. And so the 16 by 8. So I asked the little guy that was going to build, I said, is there some way we can come back on this and make a 6-foot porch and a 10-foot room? And he said, there's no problem with that. So here we are. We got a 6-foot porch. Someone said, well, you could cut that off and make it nice and even. I said, apparently you've never sat on an old cabin porch. So they're all raggedy like that, where the water has dripped on them.
Right.
I even have a West Virginia rock and some moss that I brought back from West Virginia a long time ago, and I have to water it to keep it alive. It grows everywhere up there. Just got to have some moss by your old cabin.
Yeah.
But I come out here every morning. I have a little pass-through for my puppy dogs, and they come out too. They love it. And I sit in this rocking chair. The sun comes up through the trees over here, and I just sit back here and I have my devotions. It's just a special time, and it wraps me up in my Appalachian culture.
What I liked was a minute ago when we were setting up, the sun was in your eyes, and so all you had to do was slide your underwear over.
That's it. I got long-handled underwear here, and I just slid.
It made a nice little curtain.
It made a great curtain.
So I can actually see the sun trying to go. It's pretty funny. I can see the sun kind of hitting it a little bit, but.
And I have several wood stoves, and one of the things, an elderly gentleman from here that has already passed away stopped one day and said, I have something I'd like to give you. And he gave me his wife's mother's, is a lady that went to our church up here.
Oh, really?
Yes, his wife's mother's wood cook stove. And it's wonderful. I bake in it, makes the best biscuits, and I just go out there and cook sometimes by myself. As soon as the weather starts turning, where it's a little bit chilly, I've got my cast iron pot with a pot of soup beans in there, and I'll make some cornbread.
There you go.
And I sit out there by myself, and it's just nostalgia. I guess I'm just probably one of the most nostalgic people on earth. I don't know.
Well, I would have to say that's correct, because you're the only person I know that has the toilet seat from the outhouse that they grew up in.
Yep. I hauled that
and
back.
You have it hanging up as an ornament.
I have it hanging up inside my house on my hallway wall with 2 holes and carvings on there that my uncles or my brother or somebody carved initials in there, but that's the 2-holer.
The
we
double seater.
We had a 2-holer.
A 2-hole. And so how did that mean? People went together?
Had to. There was 4 of us. 2 people have to go to the bathroom. You both go in there together. Your brother goes behind.
That's pretty funny. That is funny.
It's funny.
So we went, that was along our little journey this morning, we went from childhood to building a cabin a couple years ago, but somewhere in the middle of all that, there's another huge story. And that's a story I'd like to talk to you about as well, because there's a book written by, and you didn't know I had this till this morning.
I did not.
And interesting enough, check this out. When I bought this on Amazon a few weeks ago, and look, it's autographed by Jeb Bush and Brian Yablonsky, who wrote the book. And in this book called Profiles in Character at the time, I guess he was running for governor. I'm assuming it was in the 90s, I believe. I think, I'm not mistaken, 1995. He was running for governor, and he wrote a book called Profiles in Character.
And he became governor.
And he became the governor. Yes, he did. And on page 223, there's a person that he highlights called Janet Campbell Gray, laying cant to rest from Lake Helen, Florida. And in this book, I already read the story that he talks about your father a little bit, your a little bit about your childhood, and then talks about you being a teacher. So let's talk about that. So you became a teacher. Here's the book for people that might care to look, but it's Profiles in Character. And so talk about so where were you when you hated school. You were disillusioned with school. So how in the world did you become a school teacher?
Well, I had 2 children. My son is now 52, and I have a 49-year-old daughter. And he was so excited about going to school. But he was bright, and I know every parent thinks their child's the brightest crayon in the box.
Right.
But he was very gifted, and he learned how to read when he was 3 years old. So he had his lunchbox, and we walked down to the school. It was an old school that was built in 1901, and it was 2 doors from where I lived. So I had walked him down there a few times so we could see where he was going to go. And
now, where is this at?
this is in Lake Helen.
Okay.
Lake Helen is in Volusia County, outside of DeLand, and between DeLand and New Smyrna Beach. So I started him in kindergarten, and after about 3 days, he cried. He did not want to go to school. And I thought, I am not going to have somebody do to him what I had done to me with that 8th grade teacher. And so I went to the school, and I was scared to death, because the principal's office was the last place that you would find me. But I went, and the principal was there, and I sat down, and I said, he's already reading, and I said, she's wanting him to color blocks red and blue, and he knows all of his colors. He knows all of his numbers. He can do math. And he said, well, let's go get him. So he brought him out of the classroom, and he had been crying. And so I introduced him to the principal, and the principal said, do you know how to read? And he said, yes, sir. And so he said, well, go get a book and read it. So he's looking through the books, and he pulls one out, and he opens it up, and the principal said, can you read that? And he said, yes, sir. He read him the whole book. So he sent him back to the classroom, and he said, next week, we're going to be doing first grade placement test. And he said, I want you to bring him, and we're going to place him over in that first grade class. And it was a black teacher. Well, I didn't go to school with black people, and I wasn't sure about a black teacher, how a black teacher would work with my child. But that was the first grade teacher. We had one kindergarten, one first, one second, all the way up through sixth grade. So I took him. Well, he scored off the chart. He didn't miss anything, not one thing. I still have his records. And so they said, well, he's not going back to kindergarten. We're going to put him in first grade. So he loved it. And so I went and volunteered to become her homeroom mother. And so we talk a little bit, I think, about her in that story as well. So I was her homeroom mother, and pretty soon she said, I would like to give you a little group of kids that are kind of low that you can work with in reading. So I learned how to do reading groups, and I learned how to do math, and I worked on lesson plans at home. And next thing you know, I got hired as a permanent substitute. So I not only was in her room, but I taught sixth grade and whoever was out. And I worked pretty much every single day. And that was back in the 70s. So I had been working there probably maybe 5 or 6 years. And one day that first grade teacher said to me, I need you to get your lunch and come in and sit down. And I thought, oh, I've done something, I don't know what, how you get that feeling. And she leaned across the table, and she took my hands, and she said, first of all, we're going to pray. And she prayed for me. And then she looked at me and she said, when are you going to get up off of your good intentions and become a teacher? And I said, Alzada, I can't become a teacher. I said, I have an 8th grade education. She said, well, I've made you an appointment at the junior college, and we're going to go down and see about you getting your GED. So what is that? And she said, it's your general education diploma. And I know who's down there. One of our teachers' husbands runs the program. So after school, here we go. And went in, and he said, what do you think you want to be when you grow up? And I said, probably a nurse. I always thought I wanted to be a surgeon. And I'll share more about that in a little bit. But anyway, he said, and she looked at me, she said, no, she wants to be a teacher. And she said, you can be a nurse in the classroom, I guarantee that. So I said, well, what do I have to do? He said, we've just finished the 6 weeks classes, so you'll have to wait till the fall for the next round. And I said, well, what are they doing? And he said, they're going to be taking a test on Saturday. I said, can I take the test? He said, how long have you been out of school? I said, about 25 years. He said, I wouldn't recommend that. I said, what does it cost to take the test? He said, $5. I said, I'm going to pay my $5. Where is it? He said, in Daytona Beach. Well, I got all dressed up in my Sunday best, and I went over to see what I could do on that test. Got in line. There were barefoot people. There were dirty people trying to get their GED. I walked up, and they said, here comes the teacher. I said, I'm not the teacher. I'm the same line you all are in. Went in the room, and the instructor there said, if you're here and have finished the 6 weeks classes, sit on this side. If you're here for a retake, sit on this side. She was very condescending. And she looked out at me and she said, sweetheart, and I think I was older than she was, where do you belong? I said, in neither of these groups. She said, you didn't take classes? I said, no. She said, and you haven't had the test? I said, no. How long have you been out of school? I said, 25 years. She said, well, sit in that chair over there. So I sat down, and when she passed out the test, she patted me on the back, not once, but several times. Good luck to you. I really wish you good luck. I said, thank you. So the first thing I had on the test was algebra. I didn't have a clue. How do you add a letter and a number and come up with something? I didn't have a clue. I said, well, this is going to be real easy. I do this one, this one, this one, this one. So English, I was good because I enjoyed writing. I enjoyed reading. Did good with that. Did real good with the science. I was always science-minded. Did really well with science. Some of the chemistry I didn't know, but I just marked whatever. So we all got done. She gathered up all the tests, and she held up a big brown envelope. And she was so excited, and she said, now, if you get a big brown envelope like this, it'll be from the Department of Education in Tallahassee. It will have your diploma, and that is the same as if you went to any high school. She looked right in my eyes and said, but if you get a small envelope like this, it doesn't mean that you missed everything, but you might have to have a retake on something. I thought, well, that was real encouraging, so I left. Well, about 2 weeks later, I go to the post office. And I had a notice in my box that something was too big to go in the box. I figured Sears catalog or something, you know. And I went in, it was a big brown envelope from the state of Florida. I was so nervous trying to open. I got in the car and the tears were streaming down my face, and I opened it up and it said, congratulations, I had my high school diploma.
Good.
I said, I've got to go straight. I know school is going on, but I've got to go tell her. So I went to the little country school and I knocked on her door, and she came to the door and I'm boo-hooing. And she said, what in the world? And I said, look, I got my high school diploma. Here's what a good teacher does. She said, everybody put your pencils and paper down. She said, Mrs. Gray just graduated from high school. First graders are looking like high school. Kind of old, isn't she? She says, we need to do 3 hip hip hoorays. Everybody on your feet. She did hip hip hoorays, and she went into her costume box, pulls out a graduation gown, an old hat with a wrinkled up tassel, sticks out on my head, and we did a parade. We went in the office, in the principal's office, through every portable outside, so everybody could congratulate me. Now, we didn't have a cafeteria at our school, so when we wanted to get some water, we went to the hose outside. So she made some Kool-Aid in a big gallon jug. I know that was sanitary. And we had some stale animal crackers, and we celebrated my graduation. And about 3 weeks later, I started college. I was scared to death. But I made it through college, and this stupid 8th grader that the teacher said, why don't you quit? I graduated magna cum laude from the University of Central Florida. And I don't say that to brag, but circumstances get in the way of children. My teachers didn't know when we were homeless or when there was nothing to eat or if I was sleeping in the back of a car. A little hard to do your homework like that. So my first job, I thought, well, I don't know where I'm going to go, but I want to teach first grade. That's where I really got my training. There was one job open at that little school, and it was 4th grade. And I said, Alzada, I can't teach 4th grade. And she said, yes, you can. You're going to teach 4th grade. Now, she taught my children. The first year I taught, I had 2 of her grandchildren in my 4th grade, and I absolutely loved it. Hit the ground running. Was teaching for 3 years and got selected as the teacher of the year for my school. Went to the county, had no clue that I would ever get anything like that. But I noticed that they had moved me from table 121 to table 2. I thought, why'd they move us way up front here? And when they announced the winner, I won Volusia County's Teacher of the Year. I was then sent to regionals, and I won the Regional Teacher of the Year. So there were 5 of us in the state, and they sent us to the state. I had to give credit where credit was due. And any time that I ever talked about how I came up, I always gave credit to God. Because without God, there is no way that I could have ever become a teacher. It's through the grace of God that we even lived through what we did as a child. Well, the state came down and they had a big meeting, and they had a meeting with the school board. And I thought, why are we having such a meeting like this? And they said, we have to ask you one thing. You are the selection for the State Teacher of the Year. But we have to ask you, can you refrain from talking about God when you give a speech? I said, you're asking me to make a choice between Jesus Christ and being Teacher of the Year for the state. That's so easy. I said, there's no choice. You need to give this to the next person. They came 3 times. Can you change your mind? No, I'm not going to change my mind. You don't know half of where I came from. I cannot change my mind. But to make a long story short, I became National Teacher of the Year, National Ag Teacher of the Year, and National Science Teacher of the Year, and got to travel a lot. And then in my 4th year of teaching, I got a call from the University of Central Florida asking if I would come and lead the education procession in for graduation because of the accolades that I'd received, and I said I would. Didn't really notice, but they put a gown on me that had big velvet stripes and all kinds of, what in the world? So they said, before we present the diplomas to our graduation students, we would like to give an honor. And so they called me up and they talked a little bit about what I had done and how I'd gotten off the bottom, and a little bit about Jeb Bush's book. And they moved my tassel and they said, we turned me around and said, we present to you Dr. Janet Campbell Gray.
I didn't know that.
Yeah, I don't tell a lot of people that. That's not anything to brag about, but it's a big thing when you take a little homeless child. We don't know. And I tell my children in Sunday school, one of you one day might be the pastor of this church. One of you sitting in here could become the president of the United States. Well, I couldn't. Well, you don't know that. If anybody had ever said I would be a teacher, not in a million years.
Right. So you had all those years of teaching, you had some special guests that came through your classroom before?
I did. One of the most special, well, Jeb Bush visited with us, and he took my entire class that had never even hardly been out of Lake Helen, and he took my entire class to SeaWorld and bought us lunch, and we had a good time doing that. And then I decided that we did a lot of economics. I won a lot of state economics and a national economics award, National Federation for Independent Businesses, and we opened up a business, and we grew peanuts.
And what class was this? What grade?
This was 4th grade, and it was called 4th Grade Has Gone Nuts. And so we had a business, and we had our banker, we had our president, we conducted our meetings. These kids learned so much. And the one who was our treasurer that took all the money to the bank and everything, he now is president of a bank. And the one that was our secretary's principal of school.
Really?
So, oh yeah, there's just a lot of great stories about some of my past students. But we grew peanuts, so we wrote a letter to Jimmy Carter, and he actually wrote us a letter back. And I donated his picture and pictures with the kids. I donated all that to the museum at Lake Helen. They have now made the city hall in the old school, and they've done a little Lake Helen museum, so that belongs there. So okay. I put all of that in there. But he came to visit, and then he came to Stetson University, and we were his guests and got to sit on the platform with him while he gave a speech at Stetson University.
Awesome. So he was a sitting president at the time?
He was not.
Okay.
He was
this before he became president or after?
After.
Okay.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Really neat.
Yeah, it was really, really interesting. Had a lot of important people in my life and got to do a lot of special, important things. I taught teachers in the summertime, and I traveled, and I worked for the National Department of Agriculture and with different farm bureaus around. I taught at University of Florida. I've taught in California and New Jersey and New Hampshire, and I've just been everywhere to teach. And
Awesome.
that just was a chapter in my life, and now I have turned the pages, and I really don't want to go anywhere or do anything other than what I'm doing.
You have one thing on your bucket list, though. There's a craft museum, if I'm not mistaken.
Yes, I'd like to go to Clinton, Tennessee. Yeah, it's an Appalachian, and it's things I already know about, but just to go and see that some of that is still alive, that they are still grinding cane syrup, and they're still shucking corn, and they're still playing Appalachian music, and yeah, I'd like to go there.
And what is it called?
It's the Appalachian Museum of Arts, and they have it every summer, and it's in September. It's about 6 hours from here. I mean, it's a doable thing, but to go, you would have to go with someone who is like-minded. Doesn't have to be exactly like you, but
Right.
you don't want to go with somebody who says, well, I've seen all this, I want to see that. Just makes it, you've probably been
Right.
with people
Yeah.
that, and it just has to be exciting. I just want to go for 2 days.
Yeah, that's
It's
cool.
2 days. It's on a weekend.
So there's two things that I always kind of laugh when you tell, because you say them a bit sometimes, but one of them is that this is just like your mom said, this is the last place you're moving to. And then you finish that off by saying,
My final closing will be at Master's Funeral Home.
there you go.
And it will. I'm done. I'm not moving anymore. And I can tell you how you can tell I'm not moving anymore. I have a bougainvillea that my daughter gave me when my first grandson was born, and she gave it to me for Grandmother's Day. Now he's 27 years old. I planted it in a number 2 wash tub at the house where I was on, my big 2-story. Then I rented a house and I moved it over there in the wash tub. Then I took the wash tub and I moved it up to Georgia. I moved it here. I took it out of the wash tub and put it in the ground and said, this is your final resting place. It will never be dug up again.
There you go. And then the other thing that you've told me is, so when you first came to church, I didn't really know you or anything, but then I found out you had some teaching experience, a little bit. And so I had you sit in and help one of our teachers who had no experience at all. You were the helper in the class, and you were just there as the helper. But then that person left the move away, and then you ended up taking over that class. But you told me that even if you quit teaching at church, you're still going to be a teacher. You said, so even after you die, you're still going to be teaching.
Exactly,
and why is that?
Because I donated my body to science at UCF. So I can teach 3 more years after I'm dead. I think that's so exciting. I just hope I don't get a past student that didn't like me.
Yeah.
But I really don't think I have any of those.
So,
I have to tell you something really, really interesting, probably one of the highlights of my life. I went to Kentucky to teach teachers one summer, and we were riding along, and it was storming, and they'd had a terrible ice storm there. It was trees down everywhere left over from that, but it was storming and hailing. And so my phone rang, and the guy from the Farm Bureau, I said, can I put this on speaker? And he said, sure. So I put it on speaker so I could hear it with all the rain beating down on the truck. And it was a young man said, Mrs. Gray, do you know who this is? I said, it sounds like Corey. He said, yes, ma'am, it is. And I want to tell you where I am. He said, I'm standing on the stage, and I just got my high school diploma, and I just want to say thank you. Well, he's crying, and I'm crying. So what a neat thing. He said, I wanted you to know first.
awesome. Very good.
So you never know who you're making an impression on. And I have people that come here. I have young people that come, and they want to look around. Well, how can I do this? I mean, we just had the garden club came, and then we had the Kiwanis Club came to take a tour. And you're welcome. Anybody's welcome to just come. You know, it's not to show it off and say, look what I did, but to see how you can live, and how you can live sustainable, how you can live frugal.
Now we have, I don't think I told you this, but we have the 4-H club meets at our church every month, I guess twice a month. And they have to pick a topic every year, and they have debated doing the topic of canning. And I said, well, if you do that, I've got the person for you that might want to join you and teach you some things. So who knows? I don't know yet if that'll happen, but we'll see. Well, hey, I appreciate you just inviting me over, and I've been here before, of course, but inviting you over to the house, the cabin, and talking, sharing your story. At the end of every interview, I do this because, well, the main reason I do this is because this is not a gotcha type of interview. It's more of just a sit down. It's a casual conversation. I like to get to know about people and their past, and to make sure people feel comfortable with that, I always give them an opportunity to ask me something as well. So anything you want to ask me, if not, it's fine. But anything that you have ever wondered or...
No, you're pretty much up front and forward with.
Yeah, I try to be.
With things. Some things that you say brings to light a little bit about your childhood as well, and I can see that in some things our childhoods kind of parallel. Not being allowed to do.
Yeah, like a real strict, growing up in like a strict environment. Yeah. Religiously, I guess, strict. And it wasn't bad. There was no abuse, nothing like that, of course. But it was, I guess growing up, we lived in a pretty strict environment. The church that we were a part of for a while. And so as I got older, I had to kind of make some decisions on my own. And I feel like, even with my own children, I gave them a little bit more of a, I guess, opportunities to choose. Like we were, even when it comes to music, I love music and I love all kinds of music, but if it had a drum in it or a little beat or anything, we weren't allowed to even have it. And so growing up, I was very loose with my children as far as those things are concerned. Like, because it's interesting because all four of my daughters, when we moved here, they each got their own bedroom. They had their own choice to pick their own colors. And when they were really little, I was excited. Like, hey, we could, always do hand-me-down clothes, which works for a while. But when they start getting older, they have their own. And I started to realize that every child is an individual. And each one enjoys their own color room, had their own way of, organizing or not organizing their room. And when it came to like choosing books, we used to buy books all the time for the kids when they were little. Go to thrift stores. Every birthday, we'd go to the thrift store, buy them books. And so they read those books. But then as they got older, they chose their own path of books. Music. I mean, I feel like I'm okay with this, but we've pretty much limited our experience of music to being Christian music, where, it talks about wholesome things, not things of what I would say the world. But I mean, my kids, I'm not saying they're perfect in that, but, we listen to classical and other things too, oldies, things like that. But I just want them to make sure that I didn't expect them to be in a box. I want them to make sure, and I think God is that way as well. Now, this is not a religious podcast, but I believe God's the same way too. A lot of times we put him in a box where we expect him to do things exactly like we expect him to, but yet we're teaching Bible stories. We talk about God appearing as a burning bush in the wilderness to Moses. We talk about God feeding Elijah with ravens. We go through the different stories of the Old and New Testament and realize, here's Jesus standing up and, in the middle of a storm, he's sleeping in a boat, and then he talks to the winds, and so we put him in a box, but then we look at the scripture and we realize that he's really not in a box.
He's way out of the box.
He does things way differently than we'd ever ask or think. And, his timing is not our timing. His ways are not always our ways. And so I wanted to kind of raise my children that same way. And I'm not a perfect father by any means. I made my mistakes and all that, but that's how I've tried to raise. We learn that. I never criticized my parents for, it was not a bad upbringing, but I never criticized them for, because I think good parents do what they know to do at that time, and times change as well. And so I remember, just as an example, and I won't say more about that, but I had a preacher way in the past, but in the 60s and 70s, he would literally preach against certain things that just, you look at now, like, why would you, it doesn't make any sense. Like
right.
Wire rim glasses. He would literally preach against wire. Now that's just weird. But the truth is, in his time, in that day and age, there's a lot of fads going along. There's a lot of things and so teenagers and people were doing things to kind of just follow what was going on in culture. And it wasn't the fact that wire rim glasses were wrong. It was the fact that people wearing the wire rim glasses try to emulate somebody else and imitate someone else. And The problem is though he taught other preachers and other preachers looked up to him, they would start preaching the same things. And so no longer was it the principle of not being like the world and succumbing to the things of the world. The next thing you know, they're preaching about wire rim glasses. And it wasn't the principle, it was the actual item. And that was, once wire rim glasses were no longer popular, they were still preaching against wire rim glasses. And so, for instance, when I was a kid, skateboarding became really popular in the 80s.
Oh yeah.
And that's when it became like a rebellious culture. That's why you had to have signs that say, no skateboarding. There was kids riding on, literally doing ollies and riding up on wall riding. And so they'd leave mark on the walls and public places, tearing up park benches and all that. And so it was cool. Well, I'm goofy footed. I can't even ride a skateboard, but I wanted to be cool. So I got a skateboard and I wasn't allowed to have one. My dad took it from me and he let me have one, but I got a banana board. Well, the banana boards were cool in the 70s. So all my friends are like on skateboards, learning how to ollie and do all these tricks and doing ramp tricks. And I'm still trying to learn how to pedal a banana board. So that's what I guess would be that, like a strict background. And again, there's nothing wrong with that philosophy. He didn't do anything wrong by not letting me have one, but he was trying to teach me a lesson of, and through that though, I did learn that we don't have to be like everybody else. We can do things.
We don't. And I don't
be our
think
own
I'm
person.
like anybody else. I don't worry. When you see me in overalls, this is how you see me. I try to dress nice to go to church, but I usually overalls and a bandana.
Mm-hmm.
But I don't worry about what other people think or how other people do. You be an individual.
Right.
God made us all individuals.
Yep.
We don't have to be cloned.
Right.
I know.
I guess in today's world, a lot of kids will say, I just want to be my own person. And then you're looking like you're not your own person. You're being
trying to be like
everybody else.
Like this, I won't even
Right.
mention any names on.
Right.
There's some crazy
Right.
people out there that influence children.
Right.
And they want to dress like them and
Right.
sing like them and
Right.
act like them. And
Right.
that's not being your own person. Be
Right.
who you are and don't worry about what other people
Right.
think. I don't care what other people think.
I think it's weird though nowadays. I feel like, and I guess we'll end this in a minute, but I think nowadays it seems like, and there are like styles, but it seems like nowadays though, like anything will go. Like we were out and we just did a little travel with our family for my daughter's wedding, and then we did a little traveling past that for a week, and we were in LA and going to Six Flags, and I was just looking at the way people. I like watching people and learning, kind of learn a little bit about the culture, and I was like, it's kind of weird because I see people wearing all kinds of stuff. Like some look like clowns, some may have been clowns, I don't know, but can't tell sometimes. But some look like clowns, and some look like gangbangers, and then somebody that you could tell has a lot of money, they're still trying to look like a gangbanger, and someone, it's just funny how I don't think there's really a culture anymore as far as dress goes.
Yeah.
They say there is, but there's just so many unique things. So
Yeah.
I'm hoping that's one thing I think that's one thing that would be good if there wasn't such a
I
thing.
look at high top tennis shoes. That's what we had when we were kids.
Mm-hmm.
Happy to get them. Share something real quick. We only got one pair of shoes a year, and there was a little store. Wasn't too awful far from our house, but my older sister could walk there, and we'd save pop bottles. Now we called Coke or
Mhm.
Pepsi or whatever, we called it pop. So we saved pop bottles. You get 2 cents a piece on them. So they had shoes, and I always wanted red tennis shoes, and I have a lot of red tennis shoes now. But Mother would stand us up on a brown, they called it a poke. It's a brown paper bag, and she would draw around our foot, and then she would write our name, Janet, Billy, Wanda, Marcia. And then Marcia would take those little feet patterns and the pop bottles and go down to the store, and they had them hanging on a string down behind the counter, and the man running Mr. Hatfield, he'd cut them down, and then he'd measure that little foot, and then he'd stick that inside whoever shoe that was, and that's what we got. But we didn't wear them outside every day to play. We went barefooted because we didn't want to wear them out.
Times have changed, huh?
They certainly have changed. I had patent leather shoes for church that were way too big. We had relatives that had money that lived in Baltimore, and they would send a box down. Well, my cousins were always way bigger than I was, but my sister used to get all the stuff, and one time they sent 2 pair of shoes, and they were way too big for me. Some other stuffed the toe of them with some rags in there to help him to fit. And then she took a piece of fat meat, or we call it streakoline or side meat, and it was always on the back of the stove where she fried it for breakfast. And she'd take a piece of that and she'd rub it all over those patent leather shoes and make them shiny for church. Well, she did that one morning for Sunday school, and I had a dog that followed me and licked my feet all the way to Sunday school.
That's funny.
So those are some Appalachian stories, and I've got a million of them.
Well, maybe we can do another one day with more stories. So, well, hey, I thank you for your time.
Thank you for coming.
And thank you for being a valued person in our community, and for me personally, thank you for being one of our valued church members. So, Miss Janet Gray, I appreciate. Oh, actually, Dr. Janet Gray, I appreciate you, and we love you.
Thank you.
So,
I love you too.
Yes, ma'am. We're